So, Caitlin, thanks for being on Oldtime Central.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for having us here in Regensburg.
Happy to have you.
Cool.
It's always nice to have guests.
Yeah, it's fun.
Who play music.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into playing Oldtime?
Yeah, I am pretty recent arrival into the Oldtime community. I started playing Irish music when I was around 12 or so, and grew up in the DC Irish music community, Washington DC, and as I got older, then also started playing some Scottish music as well, and went to Alistair Fraser's Scottish fiddle camp in California, Valley of the Moon, and there people were not only playing Irish and Scottish tunes, but also some old-time tunes as well, and so that was my first time really being around people who were playing that. And definitely I didn't play too much then of the old-time tunes, but I really liked how it sounded and was always listening to it. And I went to my first real old-time jam around 2 years ago in Toronto, actually. Richard and I took a road trip there, and we just met up with a friend there. And yeah, had a jam. I didn't really know what I was doing, and so I played a tune that was just like in a completely different key from the one we were in, because in the Irish music community you don't change tunings or anything. You stay in standard, and you can play 3 different tunes in 3 different keys, one after the other.
Right.
So I just started doing that, and everyone was super nice about it. They were just they were like, oh, okay, we can totally play that tune. Just so you know, though, we generally stay in one key for a little while, so the banjo and fiddles don't have to retune every time. So it was a really nice learning experience and a really welcoming first jam. And have been playing since. All
right. So, but you started out, before you played Irish, you played classical, or?
Yeah, I started playing classical violin when I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, and just did private lessons and played in the school orchestra, and did that all the way up until I was 18 or so, and played in pit orchestras for musicals and things like that in school. But classical music gets harder to do socially, I think, unless you specifically form a chamber music group or join a community orchestra.
Right.
The Irish and Scottish and old-time scenes are a little bit more accessible on a very casual basis. You can show up and play when you want to. It doesn't require quite as much of a commitment if you don't want to do that or don't have the time. But it's nice because you can also go to every single jam or session or something like that. So I ended up going more down the folk route than the classical route, but I do miss the classical music as well. It was really, really fun. Yeah.
Well, there's more time in the day.
There's lots more time.
And when you started getting in, so after this jam in Toronto, how did you start actually learning to play old-time tunes, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly what I did after that. I was also graduating from university at the time, and sort of finishing up at my first job and preparing to move to Germany. So there was a lot going on. I don't remember doing a lot more in that half year, but once I moved to Germany around 6 months later, I was suddenly around a lot of people who played old-time music, because Richard just knew people who played. And so I was playing with him. We had time to practice tunes together, and so we would play together, and then we started going to Berlin and Frankfurt and Elmstein, which is the sort of folk school that meets a few times a year, and old-time music was one of the things they teach there, and so I took some classes there. We also went to a really nice gathering in Denmark, a little town outside of Copenhagen, and that was one of my first old-time music experiences. Was on this little fjord, a little like schoolhouse type of situation with maybe 100 people there just playing old-time music in Denmark.
Playing old-time,
yeah, that was also, I was pretty new to it at that point. I didn't really know any tunes, but
that sounds nice.
It was right as we were moving to Germany that we did that. And
that's like a little festival workshop thing that happens every year, or
what? I forget what it's called now. But it was just a long weekend there, And there were a couple of American guys who were in a band who were teaching there and performed on one of the evenings, but it was super chill. I was really sick that weekend because we had just taken 3 or 4 flights from the U.S. to get there. But everyone was really nice, and it was a good sort of another good first experience in Oldtime. People were like, "Yeah, here's some medicine, rest. Okay, come play if you want to." It was, and then I just learned a lot of tunes and recorded a lot of the tunes there as well, which was a good move because then I could remember the ones that I really liked.
Sure.
Yeah.
Recording is useful.
Helpful occasionally.
And how, because you grew up playing classical music, I guess there was lots of Irish and Scottish music there in between as well, but how's the transition from one to the other?
For me, it was a pretty easy transition. I think because I was learning both kind of at the same time. I'd only been playing classical music for 3 years maybe, but solely classical music before I started, maybe even less than that, before I started playing folk music. And I had actually asked my violin teacher if I could play some Irish music, or just any kind of folk music in my lessons. I knew at that point that was something I'd wanted to do. I think because my parents had always had some kind of Irish folk music or American bluegrass or some old time players as well. Just we always had folk music playing in the house. And so I had kind of started asking about that pretty early on. And when I played the tunes in my classical lessons, it was just from, notes on a page. And my teacher didn't really know how to play in the style, but she was totally willing to be there and help me through it as best she could. And then when I started playing Irish music, I actually started going to a kids' session in a pub in Washington, D.C. called Nanny O'Brien's. And the woman who was running the session, Karen Ashbrook, just had a really good kind of like, she had a book for the kids, and she knew how to work with kids to show them how to play in a group together with other people. And so I was learning how to play by ear and learn by ear at that time. We had the books with the notes, so I would use that at first in a few sessions, go home, practice with the notes, then go back in the sessions and try to play by ear. And so, and stylistically, there were some differences in classical music. You just don't have the same kind of a lot of the bowing is different, I think, and the way that you bow is different. So that I had to learn, but I was pretty young still, so it wasn't a super hard transition. Bowing from Irish music to old time music was a much harder transition for me.
Because?
It's just, the bowing styles are really different. Those, it just because of the way the dances are in old time music and Irish music, and the way that the tunes, I guess the emphasis on different rhythms, the bowing styles are just super, have a lot of things, and it took me a while to get the hang of the old time one of the bowing styles. There's a lot, but there was one that I was sort of going for because that just happened to be the one that I heard a lot in some of the early sessions, so I just went with that one, and it took me the better part of a year to get the hang of it, I think. But
which is pretty short in the grand scheme of things.
It's still a work in progress, but it's a little bit more something I can do without thinking about it as much.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you sound amazing given how long you've been playing it. So.
Thanks.
And I'm also really curious about what you enjoy about old time. I mean, just by itself or in comparison with other musical practices. Yeah.
I like just the sound of the instrument when you cross tune. That's something that you don't really rarely do in classical music and in Irish music. It's just not really there. And it's just that resonance that I think a lot of people are attracted to is definitely makes it super fun for me, and is like an extra reason to want to play it, is that just the sound of the instrument itself when you tune it that way. And I guess there's a little bit of a lower amount of pressure in some ways in old time music, because in Irish music you it's in a jam. If you start a tune, the tradition is you also play 2 or 3 more after that, without stopping.
Right.
So you play a set of tunes. So there's a lot of things to be thinking about. You have to remember how the next 2 or 3 tunes go.
Right.
And if they're starting a different key, then you have to remember that. You have to let everyone else know that it's going to be happening, and let the chord players know which new key it's going to be in. And you only generally play the tune through 3-4 times. So you only have not that long to figure out all of that. And so you're thinking a lot about things other than the music itself. At least I am. I like to think about the music too when I'm playing, but you just have a lot of other things that you have to remember.
Right.
In Oldtime, you can just kind of sit there on a tune for a long time. You don't have to worry about telling other people what's going to happen next, except when you're going to end the tune. But you have a lot more time to just be in the music and not worry about other things, which is a really nice and lower stress situation. Yeah. Not that the other situation is super stressful, but just more going on.
It's different. Yeah. I mean, I really enjoy that, like, when a tune's going on for a long time, you can just pay attention in lots of different ways. You know what I mean? Maybe if you haven't played the tune in a while, then at the beginning you are paying attention to, like, oh, wait a minute, how does this go? And trying to remember. Mm-hmm. But then after a while, you can get lost in someone else's playing, and you're not really listening to yourself at all.
Right.
You're listening, you're like, oh, wow, that banjo is amazing. And then later you're like, oh, wow, I'm lost in the sound of everybody. Yeah. And I'm not hearing anybody in particular.
Just the whole sound.
And then it just sort of fades in and out, so you can attend in lots of different ways.
Yeah, and that's something I had to learn how to do. I think the first few Oldtime jams I went to, I was honestly a little bit bored when we played a tune through for 10 minutes.
Right.
Because I was used to only doing that for a minute before going on to another tune. It took me a little while to learn how to enjoy that sitting with the same tune for a really long time. And I totally do now, but it took a lot of time to practice doing that and figure out what am I doing during this time that I'm playing and what am I listening to, and now it's a total blast.
Yeah, in fact, it just came to me, in some ways it is like sitting meditation that, at the beginning, and by the beginning I mean many years, you're sitting there and you're like, this is boring, I'm supposed to sit here for 20 minutes or half an hour.
Right.
But then after a while you realize that there are all kinds of things that you can attend to, and there's no way it could get boring if you're paying attention.
Exactly.
So. Yeah,
but it's not something that you know how to do right off the bat generally for most people. I would guess.
Right. Great. All right, well, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Are you and Richard going to play a tune?
We are going to play a tune.